prosecutors did
Correct.
with the report. You're not talking about whether there was bias in the recommendation not to prosecute, are you?
Correct.
And you're not saying you didn't find bias. For example, in the emails we've been having a lot of discussion about here.
I think it's clear from certainly the email, the text messages we've talked about with regard to Mr. Strzok that he had, as we say here, a biased state of mind.
And as I understand from reading the report, not only Mr. Strzok, but a number of those who you found concerning comments being made by expressed remorse, said that they intended for these to be private conversations, and then said that it didn't have anything to do with the way that they did their job. Is that correct?
That was their explanations.
And what you're telling us is that you don't have any different evidence than that. You're not saying you believe it or not. You're saying that you don't have different evidence.
Correct.
I think that's a lot different than saying there's no bias, personally. Secondly, you did say, I believe, somewhere in the report that with regard to the charging decision, since that decision was made not by those who you found the bias from, but by others, and this would be prosecutors, not FBI agents, correct?
Correct.
That you felt that whatever bias they had, at least as to the charging decision, did not flow through. Even though, can you say that that's true, even though in this case, the director of the FBI gave a charging recommendation?
Yeah, I would use the same language you did, Senator, which is we didn't see evidence of that in the documentary or testimony that we received.
Well, I personally believe that there was plenty of evidence, although it may be circumstantial, that the recommendation made by the director of the FBI was influenced by bias. Would you agree with that?
Speaking of political bias, we didn't see that back in July from the FBI director in terms of why he made his decision to make the public statement he did.
Well, and I understand that tell me if I'm getting this right. What you're telling us is you found bias. Those who you found the bias among said, well, we didn't let it bleed into our work performance, and you don't have evidence to disprove that.
Correct. And we also said that it cast a cloud over the work that was done. We also said it sowed doubt about the investigation.
All right, thank you. And that gets me to the next thing, and I'll move to you, Mr. Wray, Director Wray. And that's the leaks. There's been a lot of talk here about the leaks. I don't have time to quote it now because my time's running out too fast, but if I understand, well, let me go back to you for a minute, Mr. Horowitz. You indicated that you have found, I've looked at Appendix G and H. I would recommend everyone look at Appendix G and H to see sort of pictorially or graphically what it is you're talking about. But although I accept what you say, Director, that this is not a reflection on the entire FBI, it's a big deal in terms of numbers and in terms of the issue that is at stake here. So again, back to you, Director Wray. You indicated that you have adopted a new rule in November. What is the new rule? What is it, quickly, if you could?
Well, there are a number of parts to the new rule, but the most important of which is to make clear that only a very select number of people within the organization are allowed to talk to the media without permission. And number two, and I'm oversimplifying it,
Sure,
but in the interest of time. Contacts from the media to anybody else have to get reported. So that way you can't have somebody say, well, they contacted me, I didn't know. What I want to be clear on is that everybody understands the rules are crystal clear, so that then if we find violations, it makes it much easier, more efficient, if you will, to make sure that we're holding people accountable.
and there will be stiff penalties.
Absolutely.
Some of the penalties could be criminal charges depending on what's disclosed, correct?
Could well be.
you indicated you have created a leak investigation unit. I think that's very critical. Again, could you briefly tell us exactly what you're doing there?
Well, that leak unit, as you alluded to, sometimes leaks are criminal and sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're just awful but not criminal. And so one of the ways in which leaks can be most clearly a concern under the criminal laws is in the context of classified information. And so that leak unit that I'm talking about is really targeted very specifically on anything that has to do with leaks of classified information, mishandling, et cetera.
Well, I appreciate that. I would recommend to you that you may want to have a leak investigation unit for non-classified leaks, because there are serious problems when those happen as well. With the time I've got left, I think I'd like to change topics once more and go back to the meeting between Hillary Clinton and between Bill Clinton and Loretta Lynch on the tarmac in Phoenix. And Mr. Horowitz, you indicated, once again, I think your language was that, well, you indicated that the meeting was not an accidental meeting, but unplanned.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Correct.
How do you know it was unplanned?
Based on the records we reviewed, at least from the Attorney General's side,
Yes.
is what we were speaking to. We didn't see any evidence, as you would expect to see through the Attorney General's details, security, etc., that was about to occur. I obviously don't have authority or access over other records, and I rely on what we were told by the witnesses.
That's kind of what I'm getting at. It's sort of the same thing with regard to the witnesses who you identified who had bias. They said, well, we didn't really express that bias. And what you're saying here, isn't it, is that you haven't got the evidence as to whether it was planned or not.
We have, what I would say is, from the Attorney General's side of it, based on the reactions of the staff, how it played out, it appeared to us that they didn't have any reason to think there was a plan for a meeting.
Well, some of us think it's quite coincidental, if you will, that the Attorney General and the former president would both end up in the same place on the tarmac in Phoenix. My time is run. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just to explain that a little, there is a, as you know, discussion in here, and I encourage folks to look at that and see how that meeting played, particularly with the staff.
All right.